Hi, folks. While the FAIRtax Guys are enjoying the holidays, we present to you a sequel to last week's program. Please enjoy Would Thomas Jefferson Approve of the FAIRtax? And by the way, Happy New Year.
Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Molero.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. And we have got an episode, I tell you what, I have sweated over this one. It's hard to think that you can put 5 hours worth of work into a 30-minute radio episode, but that's what we've got in this one, but it's worth it.
Yep. Now, let's hearken back to episode 3 of FAIRtax Power Radio on Spreaker or iTunes. Episode 3 is entitled, Would Thomas Jefferson Think We Are Free? And it's a radio play that Bob wrote based on a short story written by our national president, Steve Hayes. He's president of the Americans of Fair Taxation, and another fellow, Charles Adams, who is also a published author.
Related to John Adams?
That could be. Hey, stranger things have happened. Anyways, over 20 years ago, they wrote a short story, and the scenario was, and if you haven't listened to Program 3, I strongly recommend that you go back and listen to that one. The short story, the scenario was, there's this taxpayer, George Morgan. It's April 13th. He's struggling to get his taxes done because they're due in 2 days. And there's a knock at the door, and lo and behold, it's Thomas Jefferson. And without giving everything away, so he invites him in. Of course, wouldn't you? If
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson showed up at your front door.
Yeah, I think I would. I'd like to talk to him.
Yeah. And he goes, well, anyways, obviously,
He
Mr.
ends up
Jefferson.
being not real happy with what's going on in the country. Let's just put it that way.
So when Mr. Morgan had to explain the tax code, the IRS, well, let's say that Mr. Jefferson was truly concerned about the direction of the country. So that's been a popular episode on FAIRtax Power Radio, very popular. So I got to thinking, all right, let's fast forward 5 years, assuming that the fair tax had passed, and exactly 5 years, April 13th, 2020, Thomas Jefferson shows up at Mr. Morgan's house again. What would it look like after the fair tax had already passed?
A lot better than it did before.
Oh, yeah.
No question about that.
Yeah, Bob and I have been talking about this for a long time. And yeah, the fair tax is going to help so much. I mean, it's not just a tax bill. It's an economy bill. It's a constitution bill. I mean, there's just so much to it.
Jobs bill.
Jobs? Yeah, absolutely.
And before we forget, we've got to give kudos and credit where it's due to a couple of radio pros, Chip Morris, who played Jefferson, and Mel Turner, who played George Morgan. We thank those guys a lot.
Yeah, we're very indebted to them. I volunteered, when Bob wrote the first one, I volunteered to do the part of George Morgan, and he politely declined. And I understand why, because Mel and Chip are just so much better than I could be, being radio guys and knowing how to. Plus, Chip has acting experience, too. He's active in the local civic theater. But yeah, those guys, they did the parts of Jefferson and George Morgan in the first one and in the second one. And the second one is what we present to you today. Thomas Jefferson, the Return. Actually, I'm not sure what I'm going to call it, but the scenario is 5 years later, exactly 5 years later, the fair tax has already passed. Mr. Jefferson shows up at George Morgan's doorstep, and he invites him in, and they start talking about the changes that have taken place. So I'm not going to give it away because Bob has worked incredibly hard to take all the parts, all right? And these guys are not perfect. They misstate a line. They have to stop and back up and so forth. There's sound effects that got to be put in there and so forth. And Bob has spent hours and hours and hours working on basically an 18-minute audio presentation. So,
okay, well, let's play it.
Hey, that's a good idea. Let's play it for him, all right? Would Thomas Jefferson think we are free, or Thomas Jefferson returns?
Our story begins on the rather stormy evening of April 13th, 2020. Presented for your perusal, George Morgan, at his dining room table poring over various forms and pamphlets. Unexpectedly, there's a knock at the door.
Who could that be? I'm not expecting anyone, and I need to get this work done before Emily comes back from shopping.
George pushes away from the table and walks to the door. As he's walking, he remembers a visit he had 5 years ago, a visit that now seems like a dream. Standing right there is that vision from the past, the same long red hair, the same 18th century clothing, the same man that visited him 5 years ago in 2015. George was more surprised this time than at the previous visit.
I can't believe this. Is it really you? Is Thomas Jefferson visiting me again?
Hello, George. May I come in?
George stands there in stunned silence with a million thoughts running through his head. Finally, he responds.
Yes, of course. Come in, come in. I can't believe this is happening again. I have so much to tell you.
That was my concern. When I visited 5 years ago, I was dismayed at what had happened. The republic that my compatriots and I worked so hard to bring about, that so many brave souls fought and died for, was in jeopardy. What you described to me shook me to the core. It seemed that our republic, our grand experiment, was doomed.
Well, Mr. Jefferson, you'll be glad to know that our republic is doing just fine now. There have been some amazing changes since the last time you knocked on that door. Changes I think you'll approve of.
Changes? What sort of changes? And how can you say that our republic is doing just fine, to use your words, when only 5 years ago you were in a prison of laws implemented by a distant ruling class? Have you given up completely?
George was feeling much more comfortable with his guest this time around and was undeniably pleased at what he had to tell him.
No. In fact, things are turning around quite nicely. Let me explain. When you were here before, I started thinking about what you said. I realized you were right about us being in prison. I remembered that you wrote in the Declaration of Independence about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was clear we had strayed very far from the intent of your words, and I was determined to do something about it. Then I remembered hearing about this group of people who were talking about...
Revolution? You staged a revolution? I remember what I wrote to William Smith in 1787. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is a natural manure. I'm not surprised that a revolution was needed.
No, Mr. Jefferson. We did not have to fight another revolution, although I guess you could think of what happened as a revolution of sorts.
Please, out with it, man. Tell me what happened.
For a moment, George looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed and very serious.
I don't mind telling you that after your last visit, I was feeling pretty low. You were right. We were living in a prison of our own making. But I decided that I had to do something about it. When I learned about the FAIRtax and read the information on their website... Well, that's going to take some explaining, but let's just say I found a place where I could learn about the FAIRtax and talk to others about it. I also read a book about it, and then I noticed in the newspaper they were having meetings right here in town.
George invited Mr. Jefferson to sit down in the living room where they could carry on their conversation in a more comfortable setting.
Well, just what is this FAIRtax? I don't see how any income tax can be considered fair. In fact, the Constitution forbade an income tax, but apparently you people ignored it. And, if I remember correctly from my last visit, you actually amended the Constitution to allow Congress to impose an income tax. How could you do that?
Mr. Jefferson, please remember the 16th Amendment was over 100 years ago. My generation didn't do it. But when I learned how much damage it was doing to our country, I was determined to do something about it. I decided that helping with the FAIRtax was the best thing for me to do.
Again, what is this FAIRtax?
Okay, the FAIRtax is a consumption tax. It replaced the income tax. The federal income tax is completely gone, and we repealed the 16th Amendment so Congress can never tax our income again.
Mr. Jefferson's demeanor visibly changed. He was now very interested in hearing more about this fair tax.
You repealed the income tax amendment. Well, that must have been very difficult. We purposely wrote the Constitution so that changing it was not easy. How did you accomplish that?
Well, the IRS made it easy. You remember what I told you about the IRS 5 years ago?
Yes, I do. And according to what you told me, it was bureaucracy that routinely violated the Bill of Rights.
Well, the IRS got completely out of control and was actually ruining people's lives. They were corrupt and incompetent. It got so bad that the people insisted Congress do something about it. And they did. They impeached the IRS commissioner.
George, impeaching a bureaucrat is hardly a revolution.
No, that was only the beginning. Maybe Congress thought that would shut us up, but instead it gave us hope. Hope that we could actually make a real change. Hope that Congress would actually listen to the people.
Well, I would hope so. After all, we did create a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, did we not?
Indeed, you did. And millions of Americans realized how important our founding documents are, both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. By the way, according to the history books, you wrote the Declaration almost single-handedly. Thank you for that. But back to what I was saying. We realized that allowing Congress to tax our income was a huge mistake.
Tax your income. They were taxing your hard work, your efforts to support your families. They were taxing the very thing that makes a society successful. But you said that now you have a consumption tax. How do you collect this consumption tax? How do you tax what you consume?
George delved into the details of the fair tax, that it was collected only on the final retail sale to the consumer, and it eliminated all taxes on income for both individuals and businesses. He explained that it is simply a sales tax, collected on the sale of services and new products, not used products. He further explained that the retailers collect the tax and send it to the state sales tax authority, who in turn send it on to the federal treasury. And since most of the states already had a sales tax, the infrastructure to collect the fair tax was already in place.
Now that we have the fair tax, I never need to worry about doing an income tax return, sending all that information to the IRS. In fact, the IRS will be completely shut down by the end of the year. And right now, it's only allowed to work on income taxes that were owed up to the time that the fair tax went into effect on January 1st of 2018. We just aren't bothered by them anymore. And that's a pretty good feeling.
George, I'm so pleased that your fellow citizens saw fit to rid themselves of the income tax. Amending the Constitution to allow an income tax was a gargantuan mistake, which, from what you've told me, required more than 100 years to correct. But you say now this sales tax, what you call the fair tax, is collected by the merchants and sent to the state taxing authority and then on to the federal treasury? How is this accomplished? By the way, how many states are in the country at this time?
Well, Mr. Jefferson, I believe that during your time, we had about 20 states.
25, actually.
Oh, okay, 25. You'll be pleased to know that we now have 50 states. The contiguous 48 states are bordered by the Atlantic, the Pacific, Canada, and Mexico. And then we have Alaska and Hawaii. By the way, your Louisiana purchase was a great idea.
50 states. This is wonderful. But that must be many millions of people. Again, how do you collect this fair tax from so many people? Also, where is YE?
Yeah, it is a lot of people. I think we have about 320 million right now. But don't worry, keeping track of the sales tax is easy. It's done by computers.
Computers. Oh, yes, those calculating machines you told me about 5 years ago. I remember.
Yep. We now have whole networks of these machines that talk to each other and work together. Keeping track of taxes collected is just one of the many things these machines do for us. These computers are programmed, or they are instructed by people to collect these numbers and send them to the right places.
But if these computers collect all your information, that sounds as bad as the IRS thing you told me about.
No. That's actually the beauty of this system. The computers only collect numbers. They don't collect any personal information about anyone. Each sale is anonymous. No one cares who's paying the tax as long as it's paid. Pretty great, huh?
Okay, if you say so. But it is still rather hard for me to imagine how these computers work.
Well, truth be told, a lot of people these days know how to use a computer, but very few really know how they actually work. The important thing is they do work, and they make our lives a lot easier. One of the things they do really well is keep track of numbers for things like collecting this fair tax.
Well, it sounds like something we could have used back in 1789.
Mr. Jefferson, our conversation has made me realize that we have a great many tools and capabilities that just didn't exist in your time. People have been busy inventing things ever since you signed the Declaration. That part about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, people have been pursuing a lot more than happiness. They've been pursuing all kinds of inventions. As I talk to you, I realize that many things that we take for granted now were only dreams in your time.
Mr. Jefferson is lost in thought for a moment.
The pursuit of happiness. You know, some of my compatriots wanted to phrase that as the pursuit of property, but the idea was much bigger than property and belongings. It was the pursuit of dreams, of new theories, new ways to bring in goods to market.
It's the pursuit of new ideas. Americans have been free to think big, to try new things, to take risks. Sometimes we fail, but continue to pursue what you called happiness. And ever since we passed the fair tax, there's been a lot of pursuing going on. The economy's booming. There's a new industrial park that's going to be built across town.
Industrial park?
Yes, sir. It will contain new factories, big buildings where people make things. More people will have jobs and be able to provide for their families. And those families will spend more money, which helps other businesses grow. More business and more consumption.
One thing puzzles me, George. When you asked me, and I noticed that your table was covered with forms and papers. If this fair tax is so simple, why do you need to fill out all these forms?
Oh, those aren't tax forms. Those are vacation brochures and travel pamphlets. We found that we have more disposable cash, and Emily and I want to travel someplace we haven't been before.
Well, I can tell you I loved my time in France and other parts of Europe.
Well, that's a possibility. The thing is, it's not just my wife and me. Americans are generally doing much better these last few years. Many American companies have moved overseas to escape the old tax system. They've come back to America. Many companies previously based in foreign countries have come here. More new houses are being built. Cities and towns are growing. New roads are being built. More business means more travel and more jobs.
George was extremely proud to report to Mr. Jefferson all of this wonderful progress.
Well, this all sounds too good to be true. And what of Congress? Are they trying to complicate this new tax code? By the way, with this large population that you told me about, there must be hundreds and hundreds of congressmen by now.
We have 435 congressmen and women in the House, and of course, 100 senators. Yes, it's a large legislative body. But here's the beauty of the fair tax. It's so simple, the only thing Congress can do is change the rate. With the old tax code, Congress was messing around with it all the time. They'd use the tax code to pit one group against another. They'd use the IRS to harass their political enemies. But all that's changed now.
Men and women in Congress. Now, that is interesting.
Yes, women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1919. And they've been getting elected to the House and the Senate for some time now.
Did you mean to say that Congress is not making changes to this fair tax as they did with the income tax?
That's right. That's right. As I said, the only thing Congress can do is change the rate of the sales tax. But if they do, they change it for everybody. They cannot play games with us anymore.
George, it sounds like you have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people once again.
George was really hitting his stride now.
Well, I think we're a lot closer to it than we were before. Since Congress doesn't spend any time making the tax code more complicated, they can now spend their time making things better for everyone. People have been pretty upset with the waste and fraud that exists in the federal government. And people have been letting them know about it, too. A lot of congressmen and women who were there for many years have been losing elections. We have a number of new people in Congress that actually listen to the people.
Well, when we wrote the Constitution, we assumed that the people would be keeping a close eye on the government and not let it get too big or too powerful. I'm glad to see things are beginning to swing back in that direction.
I wish I could take you to Congress so you could tell them yourself.
George, I must take my leave of you soon, but I am so grateful for the time that you have given me. I'm heartened by what you've been telling me about our country. It seems that people have changed the horrible course that the country was on 5 years ago when I last visited. As I said in a letter to Francis Gray in 1815, although a Republican government is slow to move, yet once in motion, its momentum becomes irresistible. As with a great ship, the people have changed its course away from the shoals of tyranny. You have escaped the prison of the income tax. I don't need to talk to your Congress. The people need to continue talking to Congress. Stay engaged. It is the truest method to keep your representatives honest. Never let them feel complacent. The people must be ever vigilant to ensure your government works for you. However, I am confident that liberty is on the rise in these United States of America. I only have one question, George.
What is that, Mr. Jefferson?
Just where is Hawaii?
George and Mr. Jefferson continued talking at length. Both men were confident now that our republic was more secure than it was 5 years ago when Mr. Jefferson first visited. Mr. Jefferson warned George, though, to keep engaged with his legislators and to encourage all he knew to do the same. As Mr. Jefferson took his leave, George was feeling very proud of what he was able to report to President Jefferson, very proud of his country, and very confident that the United States of America once again was on the right course. Oh, that was fun. It was work, but it was fun.
It was. I mean, I'm going to take credit. I wrote the script, but then Bob and I got together and he made some improvements to it. He pointed out some sections that needed some changing, and I thought we came up with a pretty good script. And when I sent it to our association president, Steve Hayes, I thought he was going to come back with all kinds of suggestions. Well, Jefferson needs to do this, or you need to talk about. He said, no, it's great. You know, it covers everything we want people to know about the fair tax after it passes. And, so it was good. And when I sent it to Chip and Mel, they thought it was pretty good too. So I'm very pleased that it came out like that. I'm very pleased that Chip and Mel chose to join us for this and lend their talents to this. And I'm especially pleased for my radio partner here, Bob, with all not only his experience and his talent, but the hardware, the software, and everything, and all his time that went into this. So I'm really pleased that this could take place.
Okay, of course, that story is fiction, but what the fair tax will do for the country is very, very real.
Yeah, it sure is.
The job creation, the bringing companies back that have fled the current tax system, they come back. Companies that were based overseas come here. Jobs go. It's the best jobs bill you could ever imagine.
Yeah. And you know what, Bob? That gives me an idea. Our next episode, we ought to talk about business.
I think we can do that.
Okay, but anyways, this episode, all right? Like I said, I thought these guys did a great job. But this is to bring out, as Bob and I have talked about on numerous occasions, the good things that are going to happen to the country when we pass the fair tax. A lot more than just simplifying the tax code. We talked a few weeks ago about the proposal for the tax reforms that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee. And that they will make things better. I mean, almost anything is better than what we have right now.
Yeah.
But is it the best system? They call it a better way, but it's not the best way, okay? Because it's still an income tax. You still got the IRS, and you still got the IRS running roughshod over people because Congress has given them the authority to ignore the Bill of Rights.
And you've got history that says it may stay like it is for a while, but it'll devolve right back into what we've got now, and I'll have to do it all over again.
Sure. Yeah.
We need to chunk the whole thing, rip it out by the roots, and replace it with a fair tax.
No, Bob is absolutely right. You can't fix this current tax system. And as we've seen over the last few years, you can't seem to change the culture in the IRS. They have been weaponized. And it doesn't make any difference what administration is in there, whether it's an R or a D. They always weaponize the IRS to go after their political enemies. That should not be possible. And with the fair tax, it won't be possible.
Oh, yeah. There's so much good that happens when the IRS goes away. Isn't reformed, isn't streamlined, is chunked on the scrap heap of history, never to raise its ugly head again.
Yep.
All right. Well, we got to get into how folks can help make this happen.
Well, to learn more about the fair tax than what Bob and I are telling. It's hard to believe they could learn more than what you and I are telling them, Bob. But anyways, if you want to learn more about the nuts and bolts of the fair tax, you go to FAIRtax.org. That's our national site. And most of the states also have a state site. You have to, look it up. But when you've learned quite a bit, enough about it, and you're convinced this is the way to go, the way you can help is go to bigsolution.org. bigsolution.org.
That's because we have big problems and we need a big solution. This little rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic solutions don't work. They never have.
Yeah.
We need something
absolutely.
big.
Yep. So bigsolution.org, it's got 4 buttons there. You can go through them. Also scroll down because there's a list of things that the fair tax will improve. And once you find the one hot button that really trips your trigger, all right, that is your issue. And that should be your motivation for helping out. And you can help out by getting others involved, by contributing, and so forth. Just go to bigsolution.org and check it out, and please help us out.
Yes, and understand you're going to have to push for this. The politicians have given us the tax code they want us to have.
Yeah.
And if we let them get away with just making little insignificant reforms around the edges that aren't going to stick anyway, you get what you deserve. We need to mobilize. We need to insist that our politicians represent us and pass the fair tax.
Another thing you can do is call your congressman, all right, and get your neighbors to call your congressman. Tell other people about it. When they get calls, several, like 10 or 15 calls on the same issue, they talk about it, all right? So be active, be proactive.
We know that's true because we've spoken to a congressman, Ted Yoho, here for the Florida's 3rd Congressional District, a really good, strong fair tax supporter. I wish we had, another 100 people in Congress like him.
Another way to influence Congress is PopVox, POPVOX.com. That's a great website. It's completely independent of the fair tax. We have nothing to do with it, but you can look up any legislation that you feel passionate about. You can comment on it. I oppose it. I'm in favor of it, and you can say why. And your comments go to your congressman and both senators in your state. So the PopVox is and it's used by people in Congress, congressmen and their staffers. They look at PopVox to see what the trend is on particular legislation. So it's a great website.
And we hit on this every week because because your wife would shoot you if you didn't. She's involved in doing this, the Fair Tax webinar. It's free and it's online.
Yes, as Bortz used to say, she who must be obeyed has told me, remind them about the webinar.
Oh, yes.
And you can go to fairtax.org/webinar. It's generally the 4th Thursday of every month. It's free. It's interactive. Do it.
All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. I thought that was it came off pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, it's great. And, I'm very pleased with it.
Again, thanks to Chip and Mel for their help. And I don't know if we'll do a third one or not. We'll see. But anyhow, that's going to be it for this edition of Fair Tax Power Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you that the fair tax is a big solution for big problems. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming. Don't stand